So hello and welcome. Oliver here, and today I wanted to talk about used microscopes and my opinion about used microscopes because I received a question again, and I would like to give you my take on this question. I frequent antique shops, flea markets, garage sales, and occasionally see old microscopes for sale. I actually bought a 1970s era American Optical 110 MicroStar that I'm now using. Do you have any general recommendation or general comments regarding buying old used microscopes? I'm seeing old Wetzlar, Bausch & Lomb, etc. and I'm always wondering if they might be good choices depending on the price and condition. I know you can't comment about any particular microscopes because you haven't seen or tried them, but say you saw an old, and you can now insert your brand name, microscope at a flea market and it was inexpensive. What would you be thinking about regarding actually buying it? Many thanks. Thank you for the question. Interesting question, and also a very common question. And as always, I'm probably not going to give you a very simple yes/no answer, but a more balanced one. And I want to simply now start off by telling you one of the things that I've read, especially in German microscopy forums. There are some people in the German microscopy forums. There seem to be two different views on the issue, and the one common view is that people recommend, or some microscopists recommend, buy yourself not a new microscope, but buy yourself a refurbished used microscope. Okay, because they say for the same price you get more value. That is basically the argument, okay? And the second view is the following. And the second, don't buy yourself a used microscope, especially if you're a beginner, because you don't know what you're buying. And if you're just out for observing, and then simply go ahead, buy yourself a new microscope that you're happy with, and you'll be fine. And then you can almost have a guarantee that the microscope will work fine and that you're going to enjoy microscopy. So you see there are two different views on this issue. I think it's a question of taste, okay? I now, however, have a different view on the issue. The question is now the following: what would I do if I were to see a low-cost, good microscope somewhere? It doesn't even have to be on a flea market; it can be eBay. Would I buy it? And I would probably say I would probably be inclined to buy it if it were a microscope, if it were an Olympus microscope, because then it would fit into my existing system. However, it is like this: I might not buy it because I don't have the space. Okay, so it's a pro and con, of course. It is like this, I think it is not only a question of cost, and I think it is not only a question of the type of microscope or whether it's good quality or whether it works or it does not work. I think it is more a question on how you define your hobby of microscopy, and I need to explain this. If I would be into collecting old microscopes and repairing them and refurbishing them, then of course I'm also going to buy used microscopes that might not work very well. Okay, so even the condition maybe does not have to be very good, because maybe it does have this one objective that I really want to have. Okay, and that's why I'm going to buy the whole microscope. But that is a different approach than if I were to define microscopy as a hobby, as let's say an observation hobby, where I say for me, the microscope itself is more of a tool to observe the environment. And I'm not so much interested in the microscope itself. I'm not so much interested in collecting it, refurbishing it, upgrading it, and so on. So it depends quite a bit on the way that you define microscopy as a hobby. I personally, if I saw a low-cost Olympus CH2 or CHA microscope, and if it were low cost, then I'd probably be more inclined to buy it, because then I have more spare parts, it would fit into my existing systems that I have, and so on. If I were to find another low-cost microscope of a different brand, I'd be thinking, I don't know if I actually have the space to actually store it, okay? You see, it is not, for me, not only a question really of whether the microscope is of good quality or bad quality, or whether it works or does not work, but there are also other criteria that kind of play a little bit a role here, okay? Generally, I think I guess the question is more general. Do I consider used microscopes generally an option? And I'm saying, of course, why not? but it depends again a little bit of what your interests are. I mean, I'll give you an example here. This is a microscope here. That's this one here I bought new, the CH40. Okay, this the big one here. But the CHA microscope is used. It has been in operation for 30 years inside in the school where I work. Okay, and after 30 or over 30 years of operation, it was like this, that it was essentially they had to be exchanged because all the focus knobs, all of the mechanics, the focus knobs, and also the X and the Y, the mechanical stage, they did not turn anymore because the lubrication oil started to solidify. Okay, that's a normal thing. It's got to be cleaned, then it's got to be delubricated. So you have to use a solvent. You got to take everything apart. You got to use a solvent to remove the old oil. You have to re-lubricate everything, and then it works again. So these microscopes were essentially they were useless, okay, because they could not be operated at all. It was not only difficult to turn, it was impossible to turn. So essentially they had to be thrown out. And I got them, one of them free of charge, because essentially it was not used anymore. So I got it, and then basically what am I going to do with that? And I said, okay, I'm going to decide now. I'm going to use the microscope, and I'm going to redefine my hobby a little bit. And I'm going to teach myself now how to repair microscopes. So that was kind of the intention a little bit. And I started carefully taking it apart. I even found online a manual on how to take a service manual. I even have service manuals on how to service them. Okay, so these microscopes are meant to be taken apart and serviced. Okay, so these are not throwaway consumer devices, but actually were meant to be in operation for a very long time. After a few hours of carefully taking it apart, I realized I didn't have the proper tools, and I kind of also started to reconsider a little bit and said, well, actually, why don't I just contact a proper service company, and they should service the microscope for me, and I'm going to redefine it everything, because I actually want to have a functioning microscope. I don't want to use it simply to train myself how to repair microscopes, but I want to have a functioning microscope, which I'm going to upgrade to use phase contrast. So I changed my opinion a little bit about this. Okay, so I ended up ultimately paying just 200 euros. It's, I don't know, 220, 230 US dollars, simply for getting it re-lubricated and cleaned. For that money, you get a new microscope, okay? And I paid another around 250, 300 euros for a phase contrast set, okay, which I bought secondhand. So essentially for me, it was worth investing that much money, because essentially now I have a microscope that is like new and has all of the features that I want. Okay, so for me, getting this microscope was well worth it. Okay, for somebody else, it might not be well worth it. Okay, so it depends a lot on how you define your interests in the field of microscopy, and this depends also on whether you are willing to spend money on a used microscope, which ultimately might not be so much cheaper at the end. Okay, but simply it was like this, that for the optics and the phase contrast, I mean, that was one of the ways for me to go, and ultimately that is how I then ultimately changed my view around, and where I said, okay, I'm willing to spend more money simply getting it serviced. Okay, so that is kind of the thing that I kind of want to make my point here is if I saw an old microscope and it was inexpensive, what would you think about regarding actually buying it? Would I buy it? I would probably have to restrain myself and say, well, maybe I have to urge to buy it. But I myself defined microscopy as a hobby, not so much as collecting it. I already have 5 microscopes that work. Okay, do I really need a 6th one? Okay, and for me, I have defined the hobby more right now of actually observing nature and making YouTube films, okay, and videos, and that is basically my approach. And other people might have a different approach. It's a little bit like, I don't know, I was also some years ago into flying radio-controlled model airplanes. Some people like the flying part more, and some people like the building part more. It's usually always a combination of both, but it's a question really, where is the emphasis, okay? And some people like more the building part and then trying it out, that if it works and they fly it a little bit, or other people simply buy a complete model airplane, which is already everything finished right out of the box. And maybe it's in microscopy the same thing. I mean, there are some people who like to collect slides, microscopy slides, old slides. Some people like to collect microscopes themselves. Other people like to who they don't care so much about the microscope. They care more about the observing part and taking pictures. Other people like to contribute a lot in web forms, exchanging pictures. So photography is important. Art, maybe photomicrographic art. I rather have to say. There are all different ways on how you can interpret the hobby, and I think the decision of whether to buy used or new microscopes kind of plays a little bit into that question. How do you define your hobby, and what are your interests? Okay, So that is kind of the my view here. To a certain extent, it's a question of taste. And if you're happy with whatever you have and with whatever microscope you have, it's great. After all, it is a hobby, and you should have enjoyment with it. And there are different people who have different approaches to that. And I think the first step is to obtain a microscope which actually does work, where you can actually see things, that you can participate in the observation part. And then the second or third or fourth microscope, you do whatever you want. I mean, whatever gives you enjoyment, I would say. Okay, wish you all the best. Happy microbe hunting as always. Leave your comments, like and subscribe. Visit the microscopy shop. Links are all in the description. Bye bye.